As December rapidly approaches, we talk about our games of the year, we talk about the best ones, the worst ones, the highs and the lows, all the different games that we've played this year, and what should come out on top as the best of the best. Part of these end of year celebrations is Geoff Keeley's Game of the Year Awards. The awards that come on every December and have tons of different categories for things like voice acting, indie games, best game of the year, best action game, player choice award, all those sorts of things. And it's always great to tune in with my wife and enjoy a nice sit down award show, a bit like the Oscars but for gaming. Say what you want about the Game Awards themselves, but people take this very seriously, and things like nominations and who wins Game of the Year and things like that are always taken in very high regard. And just recently, the Game Awards tweeted out the different nominations for the different categories of games, and it sparked somewhat of a debate around what an indie game is. And I am of course talking about the game that's definitely going to win Game of the Year, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Published by Sandfall Interactive, a studio made up of ex-Ubisoft developers and has about 30 people strong, the game made waves earlier this year for being just such a breath of fresh air. It's a brand new IP, it's an RPG, turn-based RPG, that has some interactive elements so you can dodge and parry during the fight to kind of keep you engaged, not just sitting watching animations play out. You're actively looking for timing windows, you're actively looking for attacks. And the story around it, whilst I thought it was a bit played out, and it's definitely a story we've seen before, which I'll not get into, I think that it really was a strong story and the characters resonated with me personally, and I think that there was a lot of emotion behind it, especially with the opening scenes. There was a lot of emotional weight to the story that has led people to have this be not just the game of the year, but the game of the decade, the game of ever, in people's top 10, top 5 games ever made. And I think that there is a lot of weight behind that. And it has been nominated for pretty much every award under the sun for the Game Awards in December. I genuinely just want to say I haven't touched turn-based games in a long time. And this game was so good that it actually got me to play turn-based games again. So I haven't touched turn-based games since like Lost Odyssey, if anyone remembers that gem from the Xbox 360. That was the last time that I actually played a turn-based game, all the way up until now, where I played Expedition 33. And I want to preface everything that I say next, because I know in certain Discords I'm kind of known as the Expedition 33 hater. I do think that it's a good game. I don't think it's Game of the Year, but I think it's a fantastic, like an 8 or 9 out of 10, hands down, brilliant game. And it deserves the awards that it gets and the praise that it gets. It definitely deserves a lot of it. And my personal critique of the game is that the back third of it is so weak compared to the rest of it. I feel like the first 2 acts of the game were so well crafted and finely put together that when it gets to the end, the final act, it essentially just goes, okay, go here if you want to end the game, or go wherever you want. And it doesn't really give you much else to go off. You're kind of sat going, well, do I go to the end or do I sit and grind out? Do I get some more skills, some more weapons, some more pictos? Do I try and find a way to do this? So, all the optional bosses in the overworld, do I go and attack them? Or do I just go to the end and then do all that later? And it turned out, for me personally, I did everything else, then went to the end, and it made the ending fight unbelievably easy. Like it was so easy that I killed the final boss in like 2 hits. I killed everything leading up to the final boss in 1 hit, and it was just it didn't make sense to me that you would have such an emotional climactic ending with loads of things going on, and there's so much drama and bombast in that final set piece that just fell completely flat when you were just 2-hitting things. So I do think that there is a big flaw in how that game works and how what it should have done was it should have pushed you into the final third, then gave you everything else after that to go and explore around. So it just went, right, okay, we're going to push you into the final third, then you can come back and you can explore all the rest of the stuff. For me personally anyway, that's how I feel. The thing is about the Game Awards is a lot of people have had their feathers ruffled, as it were, because it's been included in the nomination for the Best Independent Game and Best Debut Indie Game. And there's a lot of people who would sort of say, well, Expedition 33 isn't an indie game. And I just thought it would be worthwhile just having a little talk around what is and isn't an indie game, what does and doesn't qualify for an indie game, and how we should regard it. I think that there is a way in which it can be described as an indie game, And there's ways that I feel like it probably shouldn't. It should probably be considered like a double A game. But I still think it's going to be fun to talk about, so let's do it. My first thought when it comes to the definition of indie is something that's self-published, the same as with music. The indie genre isn't a genre. You're an indie band if you are self-published. You're an indie band if you are not owned by a label. So it's the same way with when it comes to games. You should be publishing your own stuff. If you are self-published, you are an indie developer. And as such, the way that this works currently, Sandfall Interactive is an independent studio. They aren't answering to any higher ups. They aren't owned by anyone. There's not the likes of EA staring down their neck saying, you have to do X, Y, and Z, put this sort of monetization in it. You need to change this, you need to change that. You need to make sure you're appealing to the wider market, the mass audience, that sort of thing. But they did partner with Kepler Interactive to publish the game, which essentially gave them the opportunity to have a higher budget and higher costs. And it also lets them split the costs with Kepler Interactive so that they aren't, solely relying on things like Kickstarter funding, which a lot of indie developers do. And it means that they have the opportunity to hire people like Charlie Cox, for instance. They actually got Marvel's Daredevil, an absolutely brilliant actor, to come in for what he says was about half an hour, record his lines, for the full game, and then leave. And it's people like that, like getting big name actors like that in your game, which I think it starts to blur the lines a little bit about, what is small and what is independent, and, why is Charlie Cox coming to this game if it's such a small game, off-the-radar indie game? Why is the likes of Charlie Cox coming to record for that? It seems a little bit more like it's a big publication. So if you argue that being published by someone else or being in bed with someone else, as it were, to try and get some extra money for the publishing side of things makes you not an indie game, all you have to do is look at something like Balatro, which won the last year's indie game. Balatro was in with a publisher, so they did not self-publish their game, but they are also considered an indie game. If you looked at it on the face of it, there's no way anyone would say Balatro was anything other than indie, a little pixel art card game. There's nothing you couldn't call that anything other than an indie game. So I think it's worth considering, what your definition is should probably not be solely based on, are they published by someone else, because I don't think that really works. It also, if you look at Blueprints, who's also on the nomination card for this year, they are 100% an indie game again, but they are not. They are published with someone. They are actually published by someone else. They are in bed with another publisher to try and get their game out, because that's how they get some more funding. That's how they get their game out. That's how they get some more advertising, things like that. So you can't just go, well, they've got a publisher, therefore they're not an indie game, which a lot of people are saying. There's a lot of people saying that, and I just wanted to just point that out, that having a publisher doesn't really matter. I think personally it's more about the size of the studio, the passion you put into the game, and probably more like not being owned by someone else. So you're all well and good to partner with a publisher, but if they don't own you and you aren't a subsidiary of somewhere like EA, somewhere like Ubisoft, you can't really say, oh, well, they're not an indie studio. They definitely still are. The main thing I would want to talk about personally is just whether or not they really innovate in the space. I think they don't necessarily have to innovate. There doesn't have to be brand new things for it to be an indie game, but I think indie games is where you see the most innovation in terms of gameplay, art style, aesthetic, because they are trying to stand out from the crowd. There's so many different indie developers, there's so many different roguelikes, there's so many different Souls-likes, there's so many different FPS boomer shooters now. It's one of those things where, they try to make something new and they iterate slightly different each time to try and make something brand new. And whilst I don't think Expedition 33 really innovates, it doesn't reinvent or push anything further forward. If you think about it, the combat in Expedition 33 has basically existed in Paper Mario for decades now. So it's not really bringing anything new. It definitely looks new when you see on the face of it. You don't think, well, that's always been locked away in Nintendo land. But when you look at the gameplay for Expedition 33, it looks brand new. It looks like something you've never seen before. And maybe it's the people who aren't au fait with games, who don't know older games and things like that, don't go outside of the usual zeitgeist. They are more than happy to just sit and play the same games over and over again. But then they see this great looking French game and like, And I think that's probably a big takeaway when you're looking at things like best indie game, for instance, or best game of the year. They have brought attention to turn-based RPGs again. I have already posited the question to people, if this was a Final Fantasy game by name, everything else was exactly the same, but they called it Final Fantasy Clair Obscur, would that game have sold as well? Would there be as much buzz around it? Would there be as many people playing it? Because I think a lot of people see stuff like Final Fantasy and they go, it's not for me. I don't want to touch an RPG. I don't want anything to do with it. But when everyone's like, oh, this is this new game and it's French, and they've got the wee woo man and they've got the monkey man who can dress in a Speedo. It's great, you can do X, Y, and Z. You can wear baguettes on your back, and it's dead fun and really emotional, and the gameplay is really engaging, and that gets people in. And it's the same as with Elden Ring. Even Elden Ring nowadays, I feel like people's granddad know what Elden Ring is. And Clair Obscur seems to have the same sort of cultural cachet now. Not so much that, everybody knows about it, but I feel like a lot more people have turned on to RPGs since playing this game and have sort of realized that there is a lot more out there that they can try out, they can play because of Expedition 33. I think there is definitely what I would call gateway games that let you get into different franchises, ones that'll sort of push the boundaries and sort of blur the lines between two different genres that'll get people in. So this one's sort of, it's a little bit Souls-like with it. You haven't to get the parries right and time the parries, a bit like Sekiro or something like that. And that's what got me in, was the combat. I was like, well, I like being able to predict parry windows and things like that. I'd like to try that out. And that's what got me in. A lot of people saying it was great, but also that. And I was like, I want to give that a go. I definitely want to jump in and see what that's all about. And I think it went really well. I think I massively enjoyed myself, which, spoilers, my end of year video, it will make an appearance, But I think that's what it is when it boils down to it, it's about whether the devs are free to make what they actually want to make. So you would never see this in a million years from EA. A turn-based RPG with French people and all that sort of thing. Weird abominations that look gross. Without studio meddling, no one putting their fingers in the pie and sort of saying, I want my money because of X, Y, and Z. It has to appeal to the mass audience. If devs are free to make what they want to make, and they can do that without any restrictions, without any publishers breathing down their neck, if they're just making a deal with someone and pushing that forward, I would say they are an indie studio. They are an indie developer. If they can make what they want to make without being oppressed at all by a publisher, they are an indie studio. They are empowered in themselves, we'll call it. That's probably the best way to say it, is they're empowered in themselves to do their own game, make whatever they want. No restrictions. But that being said, I do want to play devil's advocate for just a little bit. If you have a little look at the categories and who's in those categories for indie game and best debut indie game, you can kind of see that Expedition 33 doesn't really fit the mold. If you compare it to the other games that are there, it just doesn't quite fit for me. So Indie Game of the Year, you have Absalom, which is a fantastic beat-em-up roguelike. Amazing art style, loads of fun. I've been playing it loads lately. I can't recommend Absalom enough, to be perfectly honest. It's such a fun game. Then we've got Ball X Pit. I'm never sure whether we call it Ball Pit or Ball X Pit, but it looks like a fantastic little puzzle game. My wife plays this ball game all of the time, and I tried to get her to play this, but it looks like it has a bit more to it than just a ball game, but it looks so fun. John, honestly, so fun. Blueprints, again, one of my potential games of the year, personally. It's such a weird little puzzle game where you essentially build a ton of different rooms around a house to try and open a mysterious extra door that you have inherited this house. You have this weird door that you don't know how to open. And essentially that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make your way into this room and find out what the mystery of this house you've inherited is. And it's such a brilliant and clever game that it has such a weird art style, but it looks incredible. I honestly, again, I can't recommend Blueprints enough. Then you have, of course, Expedition 33. And then you've got Hades 2, which I haven't actually gotten around to playing yet. I might actually start playing it and just record a little bit of footage to play in this video. I loved Hades 1. I think I put about 90 hours into Hades 1. I got all of the achievements for it. It was a fantastic game from start to finish, very easy to pick up and put down, very easy to get lost in the source of making builds, and I believe that this one just has more content, this one just has more things to do, there's more of a story, there's 2 different places to go, there's more weapons, there's more build variety, there's extra bits to make it a bit more streamlined. Essentially, it just looks like a wholesale upgrade of Hades 1, so I know for a fact that I'm going to love it. But again, that was a previous winner of Indie Game of the Year. And then finally, you have my beloved Silksong. You'll have seen my boss ranking if you're here on this channel by now. Silksong, of course, being the sequel to Hollow Knight, one of my most anticipated games for years and years and years and years and years. And I found that Silksong was incredible. Honestly, a fantastic game that I, again, can't recommend enough. Has a fantastic platforming, fantastic combat. All of it is just top tier. So that's the full list of all the different indie games of the year, and if you look across it, you see, well, Absalom, Ball X Pit, Blueprints, Hades 2, and Silksong, they're all definitely of an indie persuasion. They all seem like lower budget, they all seem smaller scale, they're all sort of 2D or not necessarily voice acted or have any sort of big names attached to them. And then you have Expedition 33, which is like this big sort of semi-open world RPG that has very famous voice actors in, it's got Ben Starr. It's also got, as I said before, Charlie Cox. It seems a bit odd that you have these 2 big names that are then attached to this game, and then you have this sort of big, elegant story and cutscenes and direction, and it just seems on a whole other budget and scale to what's listed there. So you think the likes of Absalom, which I don't want to say it looks cheap, but it looks like its budget was significantly smaller. And what's on offer in that game is significantly smaller than what you would get in Expedition 33. And while scale isn't necessarily an indicator of quality, I do think that it's interesting that you put something like that, which you could argue, Expedition 33 is probably AAA quality in terms of what it actually offers you. It seems a bit like that's way up there compared to everything else. Even Silksong is probably the best competitor in the category. That game is still quite small scale on the grand scheme of things. It's just a 2D Metroidvania. And I think we probably need to have a little chat around what falls into that category, because I do feel like Expedition 33 stands out like a sore thumb there. And it's almost a guaranteed shoe-in to win, but it just feels odd. And then next you've got the debut indie game. So there was a bit of a weird drama with this where the Mega Bonk was in there here, but they had to withdraw their nomination because it turned out it wasn't actually their first game, and they'd produced this under a pseudonym to try and make out like they were a first-time developer. Not entirely sure why that was the case, but apparently that's the case. And then the other ones for the debut indie game category, you've got Blueprints, you've got Expedition 33, you've got Despelote, which is like a story game centered around football or soccer if you're an American. And then this one, I had to say here, Dispatch is the last one, and oh my days, is Dispatch a good game. And I think this is where we can kind of draw some parallels with Expedition 33 and Dispatch, because Dispatch has Aaron Paul as the main character. So Aaron Paul, you'll know from the likes of Breaking Bad, he was Jesse in there, and then he was obviously in the Need for Speed movie. I don't think anyone can forget the Need for Speed movie with Aaron Paul. But essentially, this is weird because you've got 2 big names who are attached to projects. And then if you look at the nominations that you've got for the voice acting, Expedition 33 has 3 different people in that category, but Aaron Paul isn't listed in there for his. And I would argue he would win in a landslide if he was nominated for Dispatch, because his performance in Dispatch was fantastic. It's honestly one of the better games of the year. I keep saying this, but there's so many good games this year that I genuinely believe it's sort of like up there in the top 10 again. Like kind of with everything else, it's up there in the top 10 again. Because what can we do? There's so many good games, and Dispatch is phenomenal. It's essentially like The Boys, kind of, where this ex-superhero is playing a dispatcher for current superheroes, and these superheroes that he's got in charge of the team for, they're ex-villains. So it's kind of like trying to weigh the balance between the villain and the hero, trying to convince these people who feel worthless that they're actually really good, and that they're really, beneficial to society, and there's all these different things that they can do to try and help people. But again, when you look at the game, Dispatch is sort of by people who used to work at Telltale Games. They went off and made their own Telltale game. So it's very small budget. It's very well animated for definite, but it's on rails. You know, it's an interactive story game. There isn't that much to do in it. There isn't a huge open world. There isn't multiple insane cast members. You know, they've got some YouTubers in. They've got the likes of Charlie, they've got Jacksepticeye, and of course they have Aaron Paul, but that doesn't really mean that they've spent their entire budget on Aaron Paul, do you know what I mean? So it is a bit strange how you can have such big names attached to it and then have this big, huge open world and have all these different features. And the budget's clearly sky high for Expedition 33. So it doesn't really match in with the other indie games in the space. And it doesn't really match in with what they've been put up against, because I don't feel like they could ever really compete with Expedition 33 based solely on their merits, because they offer such a small, refined package by comparison. So at the end of the day, to actually answer the question, and if you had been paying attention the entire way through the video, you would know by now what the answer actually is. Yes, it is. Expedition 33 is in fact an indie game. I know that they have a core staff of 30 odd people, but they've then got hundreds of contractors to help them finish the game. They've got funding from another area, they've got a funding from publisher, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not an indie game. They are a game that is independent to everyone else. They can make whatever they want. They aren't influenced by other people. They are just making what they want to make. And the fact that they have the bigger budget doesn't necessarily make them not an indie game. It's kind of like the same sort of situation as with Dave the Diver from a few years ago. They are definitely an indie game. They are definitely an indie studio. I would argue nowadays it's getting to the point of AA if we're getting there. So when you compare it to its fellow nominations in the categories, it seems wrong. It seems like they are far and away is a much higher budget game than the rest of them. I would never argue against that. I fully believe that they're a big fish in a small pond, and the small pond has some incredible fish in there. But when all you can see is one massive cod, you can't really see the rest. So I think for me personally, put Clair Obscur Expedition 33 on Game of the Year. I wouldn't argue against it. I think it's not my personal game of the year. My personal game of the year is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Absolutely fantastic game, beyond reproach. I think people just struggled with the start of the game, which is kind of the point. But essentially, it will win. It will be a landslide at the Game Awards. Expedition 33 is going to clean house. We already know this. The buzz online is through the roof. But I do think when it comes to indie games, I think what they should really have done, and maybe they shouldn't have done, I don't know. I'm not the boss of them, but I wouldn't have put it in the category. I wouldn't have put it in the indie category, whether it was considered an indie game or not. I personally would not have put them in an indie category. I would have had them on the Game of the Year award. Definitely deserves, all the best RPG nominations, all that sort of thing. But I think that indie games should be small budget, smaller scale games that get people into different things, innovate in different areas, give you something new, fresh to deal with, something new to do. And I don't think Clair Obscur really does that. It got me into RPGs again. Yeah, sure. But I don't think that it has done enough, and I don't think it is small scale enough to be put in that category, because it outshines the rest, and the budget doesn't quite match across the board. So you probably got like 100,000 budget on Absalom, and then it's like millions on Expedition 33, and they're in the same category to be voted against. It doesn't make sense to me to have that, and it's unfair to the other games in the category to have them put up against something like that. I think it's a bit like Baldur's Gate 3. It's like a one in a blue moon type situation. It's a very rare, specific circumstance that's provided such a unique and fantastic game that you're probably never going to get again, apart from with a sequel from Sandfall Interactive. You're probably never going to get that level of quality in an indie game again. So I think it's kind of unfair to hold them up against that. But maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me talking. I don't know. Thank you for hanging out with me. My recording has gone to half an hour. This video hopefully will not be half an hour. Hopefully it'll be 25 minutes max. Let me know if you agree whether Expedition 33 is an indie game or not down in the comments below. Drop a like if you liked the video. If you've hung around this long, you'll know that the schedule has been getting a bit wavy in terms of, when videos are releasing. My daughter is now born. I am now a proud father of 2. As such, my videos are all over the place at the minute, so I apologize for that, but that is just the way that life is being a dad. It's exactly why stuff like Do I Have Time for This exists, because I do not have time for this. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to go the extra mile, there is the option to now become a channel member. It's only $1.99 a month or something like that. It's like the low price I could put on it, and that get you a few extra perks. So if you want to go the extra mile, feel free. So thank you very much for watching me ramble about nothing for the past 20 odd minutes. Look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.